The council chambers of the Galactic Concord buzzed with arrogance as delegates from dozens of advanced civilizations gathered to discuss the so-called human threat, a species they had long dismissed as primitive and insignificant, their fleets laughed at, their technology regarded as outdated, and their diplomacy considered a curiosity at best. Admiral Lork of the Vaten Dominion leaned back in his seat, swirling a luminescent drink while reviewing the human intelligence reports, noting, with condescending satisfaction, that the humans had barely left their own star system, their colonies rudimentary, their weapons largely ineffective against even a moderately armed cruiser of the Vaten fleet, and yet whispers of human persistence reached even the highest echelons, tales of unexpected tactical ingenuity, of crews who survived impossible scenarios, of scientists who could devise countermeasures faster than our engineers could predict. Yet the Council collectively ignored these warnings, brushing them off as isolated incidents or exaggerations, a mere fluke that could not be replicated on a galactic scale. While back on Earth, Captain Daniel Harper stared at the holographic map projected across the command deck of the USS Liberty, a mid-sized human frigate barely capable of interstellar travel. His crew tense but disciplined, aware that the galaxy viewed them as irrelevant, knowing that every system beyond Sol considered humanity expendable and inconsequential. And yet, despite limited resources and a fragmented fleet, Harper's mind raced with strategies, not of open confrontation but of precision, of leveraging every human advantage, every unconventional method to survive, and if necessary, retaliate against those who thought them unworthy of attention. As the Liberty jumped to a distant point on the edge of the Athari expanse, scouts reporting anomalous energy signatures far exceeding what any human vessel should generate, Harper felt the familiar mix of dread and determination, understanding that whatever lay ahead would test the limits of human endurance and ingenuity. And at the same time, the alien leaders, confident in their collective superiority, convened emergency sessions to address these so-called anomalies, unaware that every calculation they made underestimated the adaptive nature of humanity, that every tactical model assumed linear thinking and conventional warfare, ignoring the chaotic, relentless, and often unpredictable spirit of humans who, in laboratories across Earth, were developing experimental propulsion systems, energy-based weapons, and artificial intelligence networks capable of coordinating entire fleets with a speed and precision that defied traditional physics. And as Harper monitored the incoming data streams, he noted that the Vaten fleet's patrol patterns revealed gaps, weaknesses born of overconfidence, patterns that could be exploited not by brute force, but by cunning, by deception, by the kind of human ingenuity that had allowed a single research station on Mars to evade orbital bombardments and still transmit critical code to the Liberty, code that would allow them to temporarily neutralize shielding on alien cruisers. And while the Council argued endlessly about sanctions and show-of-force maneuvers, Harper coordinated with his engineering team to retrofit the Liberty with experimental pulse cannons, weapons untested in the field but designed to exploit exactly the vulnerabilities of humans had identified in alien energy shields. Lieutenant Maria Reyes ran simulations at a pace that would make even the most seasoned alien tactician uneasy, projecting engagement scenarios across multiple star systems, testing strategies in ways the Council's rigid minds would never conceive, while at the same time, Earth's political leaders debated the morality of striking first, of risking open war against civilizations whose fleets could obliterate human planets in hours, and yet, even in their caution, they underestimated the audacity that defined humanity, a willingness to confront impossible odds not through superiority of numbers, but through the relentless application of innovation, adaptation, and an instinct for survival that no alien intelligence could fully predict. And as the first human ship slipped silently through the unmonitored corridors of the Athari expanse, cloaked by experimental stealth fields derived from quantum entanglement, manipulation, the Council remained oblivious, convinced that humans would either surrender under pressure or crumble under coordinated strikes, a fatal miscalculation that would soon ripple across the galaxy, for Harper's plan was not merely defensive. It was designed to demonstrate the full scope of human capability, to teach the galaxy a lesson it had arrogantly ignored for centuries. And as the Liberty approached its first objective, a lightly defended alien research outpost on the fringe of the expanse, Harper addressed his crew with quiet determination, emphasizing that their mission was not just survival but revelation, to show what humans were truly capable of when underestimated. and as they prepared to engage, the alien outpost sensors detected the incoming vessel. But their warnings were arrived too late, for the humans had already adapted to every known alien tactic, their pulse cannons primed, their navigation systems synchronized with AI algorithms predicting enemy maneuvers, and as the first salvo erupted, the Council in their chambers far away received fragmented transmissions of destruction, dismissing it initially as a minor skirmish, only to have reports escalate with the speed of wildfire, fleets vanishing, command structures disrupted, communications jammed, and then panic. As the alien leaders finally realized that humanity had not only survived but had weaponized its underestimation, and across the galaxy, whispers began to spread, rumors of human ships appearing where no one expected, of entire fleets neutralized by tactics that defied conventional reasoning, and the Council scrambled to respond, their arrogance replaced by fear, their confidence shattered by the revelation that the humans, whom they had written off as primitive, were now orchestrating a campaign of precision adaptation, an overwhelming ingenuity that would redefine the balance of power in the galaxy. And Harper, observing the chaos through the Liberty sensors, allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction, knowing that the warnings they had ignored for so long were now manifesting in ways no alien mind could contain, and humanity, underestimated and ridiculed, was only just beginning to show its true strength, a strength born not from hubris, but from relentless determination, from the capacity to endure, adapt, and strike with unanticipated force, a force that would soon echo across every council chamber, every war room, and every fleet that had once deemed humanity irrelevant. And as the first part of their campaign unfolded, humans executed maneuvers that seemed impossible, combining experimental technology, predictive AI, unconventional tactics, and the unyielding courage of crews trained to think beyond the bounds of what the galaxy expected, leaving a trail of stunned adversaries and shattered pride in their wake. And in the Council, debate turned to panic as projections of human expansion and retaliatory capabilities outpaced even their most dire estimates, forcing alien leaders to reconsider every assumption about the species they had dismissed, to acknowledge that humanity's rise was neither random nor accidental, but the product of civilization that, despite its modest origins, had cultivated resilience, ingenuity, and a relentless drive to survive and prevail. And so the stage was set, the galaxy unaware that the underestimated humans were orchestrating the opening act of a campaign that would not just challenge alien supremacy, but utterly redefine the cosmic order, with every decision, every adaptation, and every engagement bringing humanity closer to a revelation the Council would live to regret, but could never undo, as the Liberty continued its silent advance to the outer reaches of the Athari expanse. Captain Daniel Harper reviewed the latest intelligence feeds, his mind racing with calculations and contingency plans, understanding that the human advantage lay not in raw firepower, but in unpredictability, in exploiting weaknesses the alien fleets could not even imagine, while across multiple star systems. Alien leaders convened emergency war councils, their previously unshakable confidence now eroded by reports of human attacks that defied standard tactical models. Fleets that had been considered invincible were suddenly crippled, stations once thought secure were destroyed, and communications networks fell silent. The Vatan Dominion struggling to comprehend how a species they had ridiculed could simultaneously survive orbital bombardment, infiltrate secure installations, and strike with such precision that entire battle groups were incapacitated before reinforcements could respond. And, back on the Liberty, Harper's crew worked tirelessly, engineers recalibrating energy matrices for maximum efficiency, tacticians running dozens of simultaneous engagement simulations, medics preparing for casualties that might never come, soldiers rehearsing boarding maneuvers, and scientists transmitting critical data back to Earth for analysis and deployment. Their combined efforts reflecting a uniquely human coordination that was adaptive, fluid, and astonishingly effective, a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies and predictable decision-making processes of the alien civilizations, as the humans' first wave of strikes targeted supply depots and fuel nodes hidden deep within contested systems, creating confusion and panic far beyond the immediate destruction. Alien commanders scrambled to respond, sending reconnaissance fleets that found only abandoned positions or traps cleverly laid by Harper's AI-assisted strategies. And with every engagement, the humans learned and adapted, predicting alien countermeasures, exploiting flaws in their communications, and striking at points of maximum vulnerability, demonstrating not just skill, but a level of strategic foresight that began to terrify even the most experienced alien officers. While on Earth, military councils observed the unfolding campaign with a mixture of awe and relief, understanding that the human approach was not recklessness, but deliberate, carefully calculated improvisation, turning every perceived weakness into a strength, every limitation into a tactical advantage. And as Harper's forces moved deeper into enemy territory, the Council's panic intensified. Their initial assumptions of human inferiority now shattered. Fleets that had once operated with impunity were forced into defensive postures, their command structures disrupted, supply lines destroyed, and morale plummeting as alien soldiers witnessed humans outmaneuver and outthink them at every turn. Yet amidst the chaos, Harper remained calm, analyzing alien behavioral patterns, noting the predictability born from arrogance, and exploiting it ruthlessly, directing his pulse cannons to disable engines rather than destroy ships outright, creating temporary paralysis that allowed humans to capture vessels intact, harvest their technology, and study alien tactics firsthand, all while maintaining minimal exposure and casualties, a feat that alien strategists found incomprehensible and deeply unsettling as simultaneous strikes across multiple sectors revealed a human coordination and communication network that moved faster than alien intelligence estimates, showing that humanity's capacity for rapid adaptation, decentralized decision-making, and creative problem-solving far outpaced the rigid, linear strategies of the galaxy's dominant powers. And even as alien leaders debated whether to retreat, negotiate, or escalate, they found themselves paralyzed by the realization that every option had already been anticipated and countered by humans, leaving them not merely vulnerable but powerless to stop the unfolding devastation. And as Harper directed a daring raid on a heavily fortified orbital station, the humans executed maneuvers that defied every known law of engagement, using decoy drones, AI-predicted warp jumps, and coordinated boarding actions to neutralize defenses and seize control with efficiency and minimal loss, sending shockwaves back to the council chambers where delegates could no longer dismiss the humans as insignificant. Each report a lost fleet or destroyed installation, adding to the mounting horror, forcing them to confront the possibility that their underestimation had been catastrophic. And as the campaign progressed, human crews displayed remarkable ingenuity in repurposing alien technology, modifying captured vessels, and integrating new propulsion and weapon systems into their strategies, allowing them to strike further, faster, and more unpredictably than anyone had thought possible, spreading confusion and fear throughout the enemy ranks, while Harper meticulously coordinated follow-up attacks, targeting command nodes and supply lines, ensuring that each action compounded a strategic advantage. And across the galaxy, whispers of humanity's unexpected dominance began to circulate. Alien soldiers questioning their orders, fleets hesitating to engage, and entire civilizations forced to rethink their assumptions about this underestimated species, realizing too late that humanity's survival was only the beginning, that their cunning, adaptability, and relentless determination had transformed them from a dismissed, peripheral race into a central force capable of toppling the most powerful empires in the galaxy. And Harper, observing the results of the first 2 weeks of the campaign, recognized that the real battle was not only against alien ships, but against the arrogance and hubris of leaders who had dismissed warnings for centuries, leaders who now faced a human response that was surgical, devastating, and unstoppable in its precision. And as the Liberty prepared for the next phase, targeting a key alien logistics hub deep within the Vatican-controlled sector, Harper reminded his crew that humanity's greatest weapon was not technology alone, but the indomitable spirit of people who refused to be written off, a spirit that would carry them through every engagement, redefine the rules of war, and ultimately force the galaxy to reckon with the consequences of ignoring warnings about a species they never took seriously until it was far too late. As the shockwaves from the fall of the Vatican logistics hub spread through the surrounding sectors, the once orderly structure of the galactic concord began to fracture, fear replacing certainty as system after system reported disruptions, shortages, and unexplained losses. And for the first time in recorded history, the dominant powers of the galaxy found themselves reacting rather than controlling. While on the bridge of the Liberty, Captain Daniel Harper studied the expanding web of consequences his campaign had triggered, noting how every severed supply route forced alien fleets to withdraw, how every disabled communication relay isolated entire armadas, and how every captured vessel provided humans with deeper insight into enemy technology and doctrine. And yet he also understood that this was only the opening phase, that true victory would require dismantling not just fleets, but the psychological foundation of alien supremacy. The belief that humans were weak, predictable, and ultimately irrelevant. And across the Concord, emergency councils convened in frantic succession, their discussions no longer dominated by arrogance but by desperation, voices raised, accusations traded, long-standing rivalries resurfacing as each species sought to shield its own territories first. And in that chaos, human strategists saw opportunity, recognizing that divided leadership and conflicting priorities would slow any unified response, allowing their next moves to cut even deeper. And as Harper coordinated with Earth's command, a new phase of operations began, one focused on demonstrating not just tactical brilliance, but strategic inevitability, showing the galaxy that resistance would only accelerate collapse. And so human task forces, small in number but lethal in execution, appeared across multiple fronts, striking shipyards, research facilities, and command centers with surgical precision, never lingering long enough to be trapped, always vanishing, before superior numbers could converge, leaving behind wreckage, silence, and unanswered questions. And in the wake of these attacks, alien morale plummeted. Crews began to doubt the competence of their leaders. Officers hesitated before engaging, fearing traps and unseen weapons. And rumors spread of human ships that could predict movements before orders were even given, of weapons that could bypass shields thought invulnerable, of tactics that turned overwhelming force into liability. And within the Concord chambers, analysts struggled to make sense of the data, their models collapsing under the weight of human unpredictability. Every assumption about linear escalation and conventional deterrence proving useless against an adversary that adapted faster than projections could be updated. And as the council debated whether to attempt negotiations, launch a full-scale counteroffensive, or retreat to fortified core systems, Harper and his counterparts on Earth accelerated their plans, understanding that hesitation on the enemy's part was a weapon in itself, and that the longer the Concord argued, the more deeply human forces could embed themselves in the fabric of galactic infrastructure, gathering intelligence, sabotaging critical nodes, and preparing the conditions for a decisive blow. And on distant worlds, civilian populations began to feel the impact, trade routes collapsing, energy shortages spreading, communications failing, and for the first time, ordinary beings across the galaxy associated that disruption with a single source, humanity, the species once dismissed as insignificant, now spoken of in fearful tones, and in response, some alien commanders attempted bold strikes against human-held positions, only to find their fleets lured into carefully prepared kill zones, where mines hidden batteries, and coordinated assaults shattered formations before they could bring their superior numbers to bear, reinforcing the growing belief that every human move was part of a larger design, a web of contingencies and countermeasures that left no room for error. And through it all, Harper remained focused, refusing to be drawn into displays of brute force, insisting that the campaign remain a demonstration of control rather than rage, of inevitability rather than chaos, because he knew that the ultimate goal was not merely to win battles, but to break the will of the Concord, to force its leaders to confront the full cost of their underestimation. And as reports of human successes accumulated, the tone within the council shifted from disbelief to dread, from arrogance to a dawning realization that the warnings they had ignored, the intelligence they had dismissed, and the species they had mocked had become the greatest strategic threat they had ever faced, and that the balance of power in the galaxy was already tilting, not through a single overwhelming strike, but through a relentless, adaptive campaign that eroded their strength, unity, and confidence with every passing cycle, setting the stage for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of fleets or empires, but the very hierarchy of civilizations across the stars. As the Galactic Concord struggled to regain cohesion, its member civilizations now facing shortages, disrupted communications, and mounting losses, the psychological impact of the human campaign began to outweigh even the physical destruction, because for the first time in their long history of dominance, the great powers of the galaxy no longer felt in control of events. And on the bridge of the Liberty, Captain Daniel Harper watched this shift with careful attention, knowing that fear, once rooted, could spread faster than any fleet, and that a frightened enemy made mistakes, overreacted, and fractured under pressure, while human intelligence networks, expanded through captured technology and infiltrated data streams, mapped every movement of alien task forces, every emergency redeployment, every internal dispute within the Concord, revealing a picture of growing disunity as ancient rivals accuse one another of incompetence and betrayal, each seeking to divert human attention away from their own vulnerable systems. And Harper, in coordination with Earth's command, decided to exploit this fracture deliberately, directing human strike groups to appear briefly in multiple contested regions, conducting limited but highly visible operations that forced the Concord to spread its remaining fleets thin, weakening defensive concentrations and straining already fragile logistics. And as alien commanders rushed to respond to each new incursion, they found themselves chasing shadows, committing forces to sectors where humans vanished moments later, only to strike elsewhere with greater effect, reinforcing the sense that the humans were always one step ahead, anticipating reactions and manipulating them. And within the Concord central chambers, debates grew more desperate, some leaders calling for total war and the mobilization of every remaining ship, others urging immediate negotiations, fearing that continued resistance would invite annihilation, while hardline factions demanded punitive strikes against Earth itself, unaware that human defenses, bolstered by rapid technological integration and unprecedented coordination, had already been prepared for such an eventuality. And as the Council argued, a coalition fleet was finally assembled to hunt down the core of the human task force, believing that a decisive engagement could restore confidence and reassert dominance. And this armada, massive by any standard, moved into the Athari expanse, its commanders confident that sheer numbers and firepower would crush the upstart species. Yet Harper had anticipated this move weeks in advance, and he allowed the fleet to advance unchallenged, feeding it just enough intelligence to control leaks and false signals to guide it into a region of space where gravitational anomalies, radiation fields, and carefully seeded mines would negate its numerical advantage. And as the alien armada entered the trap, human forces emerged from concealed positions, striking at key command vessels, jamming communications, and triggering environmental hazards that threw formations into chaos. And in the confusion, smaller, faster human ships darted in and out, disabling engines, targeting sensor arrays, and isolating segments of fleet, turning the armada's own mass into a liability. And the resulting battle, though not the largest in scale, became a turning point in perception, because for the first time, a major Concord fleet was not merely damaged but decisively outmaneuvered, its retreat disorganized and costly, its aura of invincibility shattered before the eyes of the galaxy, and reports of engagement spread rapidly, carried by surviving vessels and fragmented transmissions, fueling fear and doubt among other fleets and worlds, while on Earth, leaders observed the outcome with grim resolve, recognizing that the path they had chosen was closing off alternatives, that the galaxy was being forced to confront a new reality in which humanity could not be intimidated, coerced, or quietly erased. And Harper, reviewing after-action data, emphasized as officers that restraint was still essential, that the objective was not wanton destruction but strategic collapse, the erosion of the Concord's ability to function as a unified power. And to that end, human operations intensified in subtle ways, targeting bureaucratic centers, data archives, and political hubs, exposing corruption, manipulation, and long-suppressed conflict within and between alien governments, further weakening trust and cooperation. And as these revelations spread, the authority of the Council waned, its decrees questioned, its strategies doubted, and its claimed unquestioned leadership undermined, all while human forces maintained pressure on the military front, ensuring that no pause allowed the Concord to regroup. And in this environment of fear, division, and relentless human adaptation, a new understanding began to take hold among many alien populations and even some of their leaders, that the war was no longer about punishing an upstart species, but about surviving in the face of an adversary whose strength lay not only in weapons and ships, but in an ability to learn, to improvise, and to turn every challenge into an advantage, and that the warnings once dismissed as exaggerations had, in fact, understated the danger, because humanity was proving itself not merely capable of fighting the galaxy's great powers, but of dismantling the very structures that had sustained their dominance for ages. As the Concord Authority continued to erode, The war entered a phase no alien strategist had ever prepared for, a phase where fear outweighed doctrine and survival instincts overrode centuries of rigid military tradition, and across multiple core systems, governors and fleet commanders began acting independently, pulling forces back to defend their own worlds rather than obeying council directives, fragmenting what had once been the most unified and overwhelming military structure in the galaxy. And Captain Daniel Harper watched these developments with cold clarity, understanding that unity had been the true strength of the Concord, and that once broken, its vast fleets were nothing more than isolated formations, vulnerable to being defeated in detail. And so human operations shifted again, focusing on accelerating this fragmentation, striking at symbolic targets that represented council authority, intercepting official transmissions, and broadcasting evidence of abandoned colonies, sacrifice fleets, and political infighting, ensuring that distrust spread faster than any physical attack. And among alien populations, panic took hold as worlds realized they could no longer rely on the Concord to protect them, that the leaders who had promised security and dominance were now paralyzed by fear of a species they had mocked as insignificant. And while some called for peace, others demanded total war. But none could agree on a single course of action, and into this confusion, human forces moved with deliberate precision, offering no clear front lines, no central fleet to destroy, only a network of coordinated task groups that appeared, struck, and vanished, guided by predictive intelligence and a doctrine built on flexibility rather than hierarchy. And in several systems, human diplomats, protected by stealth escorts, made quiet contact with local authorities, not to negotiate surrender, but to deliver a simple message that humanity did not seek to rule the galaxy, only to ensure that no council or empire would ever again consider extermination or subjugation a viable option. And this message, combined with the undeniable proof of human capability, began to sway even those who had once supported the Concord's hardline stance. And as resistance weakened, Harper authorized a bold operation aimed not at another fleet or base, but at the Concord Central Command Nexus, the station from which strategic orders, fleet deployments, and political decisions have been issued for generations, a place believed to be untouchable, protected by layered defenses and the combined might of multiple species. And the plan was not to destroy it outright, but to demonstrate beyond any doubt that no stronghold was beyond human reach. And when the operation began, it unfolded with the same unsettling efficiency that had come to define the campaign: stealth ships bypassing detection, cyber units penetrating data cores, and strike teams disabling critical systems in minutes, leaving the Nexus blind, silent, and effectively powerless. And as the lights went out in the heart of the Concord, panic rippled through every connected world. Because if the center could fall, then nowhere was truly safe, and the Council, cut off from its fleets and its communications, finally confronted the full magnitude of its mistake, realizing that the warnings they had ignored had not been about a future threat, but about a present reality, that humanity's strength lay not in a single superweapon or massive armada, but in a way of thinking that turned uncertainty into opportunity and pressure into clarity. And as emergency systems slowly came back online, the first transmissions from the Nexus carried a tone never before heard from the Concord, not commands, not threats, but confusion and fear. And in that moment, the balance of the galaxy shifted irreversibly, because the myth of alien invincibility was shattered, replaced by the knowledge that a species, once dismissed as primitive, had systematically dismantled the political, military, and psychological foundations of galactic dominance. And Captain Harper, receiving confirmation of the operation's success, knew that the final phase was approaching, the phase in which the Concord would no longer be able to pretend that this was a limited conflict or a temporary setback, but would be forced to face the consequences of its arrogance, and to understand at last that by ignoring the warnings about humanity, it had set in motion a chain of events that could no longer be stopped, events that would decide not just the outcome of a war, but the future order of the entire galaxy. The collapse of the Concord Central Command Nexus sent shockwaves through every layer of galactic society, not just through fleets and governments, but through the collective belief system that had sustained alien dominance for millennia. Because in a single, precise operation, humanity had proven that no fortress, no political center, and no concentration of power was beyond its reach. And as news of the blackout spread, entire sectors descended into uncertainty, defense network switching to autonomous modes, planetary militias mobilizing without coordination, and long-suppressed rivalries flaring as worlds prepare to stand alone. And Captain Daniel Harper understood that this moment of fear and isolation was the most dangerous and the most decisive phase of the conflict. For an enemy that felt cornered could either collapse or lash out with everything it had left. And intelligence soon confirmed that a coalition of the remaining hardline powers within the Concord had chosen. The latter, assembling what was left of their combined fleets around a heavily fortified core system, declaring it the final bastion of galactic authority, and issuing a call for all loyal forces to rally for a decisive stand. And though their public statement spoke of honor and unity, the private transmissions revealed desperation, a last attempt to project strength in the face of a campaign that stripped them of confidence, coordination, and strategic initiative. And Harper, along with Earth's unified command, analyzed the buildup carefully, recognizing both the danger and the opportunity. Because while the concentration of enemy power posed a significant threat, it also meant that the last cohesive force of the old order was exposing itself, gathering in one place, relying once more on mass and intimidation rather than adaptability. And so the humans prepared not for a simple battle, but for a confrontation that would end the war's central question, whether the galaxy would continue to be ruled by fear and hierarchy, or whether a new balance, forged by resilience and innovation, would replace it. And as human fleets, now larger and more capable than at the war's beginning thanks to captured technology and accelerated production, maneuvered toward the core system, they did so with the same doctrine that had guided every previous success: flexibility, layered planning, and the assumption that no plan would survive first contact unchanged. And across their ships, crews prepared with quiet determination, aware that they were approaching the culmination of a struggle that would define humanity's place among the stars for generations. And when the first probes entered the contested system, they encountered dense defensive formations, overlapping fields of fire and energy signatures that indicated the presence of some of the most powerful weapons the Concord had ever deployed. Yet instead of retreating or launching an immediate frontal assault, Harper ordered a series of feints and indirect actions, testing responses, drawing out reserve forces, mapping firing patterns, and feeding data into predictive models that adjusted in real time. And as the alien commanders reacted, shifting formations and committing assets to counter perceived threats, they unknowingly revealed the very vulnerabilities their rigid doctrines could not conceal: gaps between command layers, delays in decision transmission, and an over-reliance on centralized control that could be disrupted. And with each exchange, human confidence grew, not in an easy victory, but in the knowledge that the same principles that had carried them through every previous phase still held true: that adaptability would overcome mass, that coordination would defeat hierarchy, and that a species forged in uncertainty and constant change was uniquely suited to thrive in a conflict where fixed assumptions became liabilities. And while the galaxy watched, holding its breath, the stage was set for the final demonstration, the moment when the last defenders of the old order would either shatter the human advance or be forced to accept, beyond all denial, that the warnings they had once laughed at had described a future that was now unfolding before them, a future in which humanity was no longer a peripheral actor, but a central force whose resolve, ingenuity, and unity could not be broken by numbers alone. The final confrontation unfolded not as a single thunderous clash, but as a carefully orchestrated unraveling of everything the remaining Concord powers believed made them invincible, because while their fleets massed in tight, imposing formations around their core system, projecting strength and issuing declarations of unbreakable resolve, the human command viewed the battlefield as a living system of interdependent parts, each one vulnerable to disruption. And Captain Daniel Harper, coordinating with Allied task force leaders and Earth's strategic network, initiated the last phase with a sequence of actions designed to overload enemy perception and decision-making, launching waves of autonomous probes, electronic warfare pulses, and false fleet signatures that forced alien commanders to divide their attention, their fire, and their trust in their own sensors. And as defensive grids lit up across the system, engaging targets that were never meant to survive, the true human strike groups slipped through corridors of space that had been calculated down to the smallest gravitational fluctuation, emerging within range of critical command and power nodes before defenders could realign. And in those first decisive moments, centralized control began to fail, orders arriving too late or not at all, formations drifting out of alignment, overlapping fields of fire dissolving into confusion. And then the humans struck in earnest, not with a single overwhelming barrage, but with layered coordinated blows at targeted communication hubs, energy distribution networks, and fleet flagships in rapid succession, isolating units from one another and turning the vast armada into a collection of blind, leaderless groups. And as panic spread through alien ranks, human ships maneuvered with a fluidity that contrasted sharply with the rigid, pre-planned movements of their opponents, adjusting vectors, redistributing fire, and exploiting every opening created by hesitation or miscommunication. And one by one, the symbols of Concord authority fell silent, command vessels disabled, defensive platforms neutralized, and the last reserves committed in desperate counterattacks that were met and contained by human formations already anticipating their trajectories. And throughout the system, the battle became a cascade of collapses, not because the aliens lacked courage or firepower, but because their way of war could not adapt fast enough to an enemy that learned and adjusted in real time. And as the final holdouts attempted to regroup around their inner defenses, they found those positions already compromised, infiltrated by teams and systems that had been inserted during earlier phases of the campaign, leaving them with no secure ground from which to reassert control. And in the council chambers, now reconnected but stripped of any real authority, leaders watched the tactical displays in stunned silence, seeing the last cohesive force of the old order disintegrate under a methodical, unrelenting human advance. And in that moment, the full weight of their error became impossible to deny. The warnings they had ignored, the intelligence they had dismissed, the assumptions they had clung to, all converging into a single, undeniable truth, that humanity's strength had never been in matching the galaxy's empires ship for ship or weapon for weapon, but in outthinking, outlasting, and outmaneuvering them, in turning flexibility into doctrine and resilience into strategy. And as the fighting finally subsided, not with the annihilation of every enemy vessel, but with the complete collapse of organized resistance, a new silence settled over the core system, a silence heavy with the realization that an era had ended, and Captain Harper, standing on the bridge of the Liberty, looked out at the drifting remnants of fleets that had once ruled the stars, knowing that the galaxy would never again view humanity as insignificant, and that the lesson carved into the void by months of relentless, adaptive warfare would endure far longer than any single victory, that underestimating a species forged by struggle, driven by ingenuity, and unified by the will to survive was not merely a mistake, but a fatal one. And across the stars, as surviving leaders and worlds absorbed the outcome, the balance of power shifted irreversibly, not toward a single new empire, but toward a future in which the warnings about humanity would never again be ignored, because the cost of doing so had been written in shattered fleets, broken councils, and the final understanding that those who had once sought to erase or dominate Earth had instead signed the end of their own unquestioned supremacy.